You know, I wonder how I would view the Bible if I had not grown up with it. That's a reoccurring thought of mine. What would it be like to be introduced to the Bible? What would it be like to read it for the very first time on my own without really knowing anything about it? Occasionally, before the pandemic, when we had normal uh, church meetings and gatherings, um, we'd sometimes get a few people who would come to church who had never been to church. Maybe they've never really read the Bible much at all, and you know, as as we do here, we invite them to come, and they may attend our Sunday school. And as we go about our lesson, we invite them to read the passage along with us. And whenever I see that happen, I just wonder, what they actually think about whatever it is they're reading, or whatever it is we're talking about in the Sunday school. Does it make sense, or does it just seem like gibberish? If I were in their shoes, what would I think about it? What would my impression of it be? I really don't know what that would be like. Since I grew up with the Bible, I've been reading it for as long as I've been able to read. It's like, they we learn English through reading the Bible, basically. So it just doesn't feel unusual. The Bible's just been there the entire time. It just always feels so familiar to me. So I like to imagine what it would be like. How do other people who have never, grown up with the Bible, how do they view its message at first glance? I imagine that many would find the message of the Bible to be very unusual. When I think about it from an outside perspective, I feel as though it is indeed a book that goes against the norm, not just in what it instructs people to do, or even what it sets forth as moral law, though those things certainly go against the norm, but also in just, the overall themes of the book. On one hand, the Bible consistently praises God and presents him as perfect and good. Even that is something that through the years I've always found very, kind of strange. He can only be described with every single good trait or characteristic that we can think of. He is more beautiful than we can imagine. He is more powerful than we can comprehend. And he even sets the standard for love, which many would consider to be the most wonderful concept that we have. And I think most people would have no problem with this kind of image of God. And they may question whether or not these claims are true, but I think when they read it, it's not like something that would, cause them much issue or concern. On the other hand, with regard to the human race, it paints a very different picture, right? It's very dark. But by the third chapter of Genesis, we've already sinned. By the fourth chapter, we've already murdered. By the sixth chapter, God could no longer hold back judgment because he considered the wickedness of the earth to be too great. And even then, after starting all over from scratch with Noah's family, we learned that the people rebelled against God once again at the Tower of Babel. And it doesn't just stop there. That's only the beginning, right? All throughout the Bible, we see that no matter what, people in general just aren't very good. Only Jesus is shown to be good through and through, even to his death. But everyone else is flawed, maybe even horribly so. Even those favored by God, considered righteous, they all have something that miss the mark. That's why I find it fascinating. How could a religion that continually points out our failures, make us out to be such, terrible people, be such a strong influence in our world? I think that people, like to be praised, adored, appreciated, respected, so much so that you think that a more flattering, pat yourself on the back kind of religion would be more popular or well known than the Bible. Yet we see the exact opposite happen, right? Even then, for those of us who accept this word, this Bible, do we take those lessons to heart? Do we truly recognize just how depraved and rebellious the human race is? With that thought, we're going to open up our Bibles, and I'm just going to go over a small story today that got me thinking about today's topic. We're going to read a short passage from Deuteronomy 1. And just to give some context, what we're about to read is a retelling by Moses of an event that happened in the previous book. I kind of want to just keep it shorter than the full story that Xander was going towards. But so we're just going to read the shorter Moses retelling version. And we're going to begin by reading verses 19 to 25. Then we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrifying wilderness that you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, as the Lord our God commanded us. And we came to Kadesh Barnea, and I said to you, you have come to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is giving us. See, the Lord your God has set the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has told you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Then all of you came near me and said, let us send men before us, that they may explore the land for us and bring us word again of the land, of the way by which we must go up and the cities into which we shall come. The thing seemed good to me, and I took 12 men from you, one man from each tribe. And they turned and went up into the hill country and came to the valley of Eshcol and spied it out. And they took in their hands some of the fruit of the land and brought it down to us, and brought us word again and said, it is a good land that the Lord our God is giving us. I assume you all know about Exodus. You know, the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. God sent Moses to get them out. Pharaoh refused to let them go. Then God sent plagues that practically ruined Egypt to the point where Pharaoh felt like, you know, he didn't really have much choice and finally let them go. So they left, and then, you know, a lot of other stuff happened, which we won't discuss here. And they would eventually head for the promised land. And we do find out that it actually wasn't that long of a journey. But then this is what happened when they, you know, started to approach the promised land. They were getting close. They were basically at its front door. Moses told them, go in, as God commanded. Take the land. After all, this was the land that God had prepared for them from the time of, you know, Abraham, hundreds of years ago. It was inhabited at this time. You know, a lot of things happen, and a lot of people will eventually move in. It's supposed to be a really good land, right? But God told them that he would just give it to them. They just needed to take a step of faith by fighting for it. But the Israelites had another idea. They figured they might as well be prepared, or at least that's the pretext that they use here. They told Moses to first send in some spies to determine the best approach. Let's have a plan of how we want to go into this land. You know, it didn't sound like a bad idea to Moses, apparently. After all, even we have the saying, look before you leap. Nothing wrong with that, right? So Moses agreed. They sent 12 spies, a member from each tribe, and in the beginning, it sounded good, right? It's a good land that the Lord our God is giving us. Then what? Upon hearing this good news, upon looking at the great fruit, do they rush on in? Let's find out by continuing the reading. Verses 26 to 33. Yet you would not go up, but rebelled against the command of the Lord your God. And you murmured in your tents and said, because the Lord hated us, he has brought us out of the land of Egypt to give us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us. Where are we going up? Our brothers have made our hearts melt, saying, the people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven. And besides, we have seen the sons of Anakim there. Then I said to you, do not be in dread or afraid of them. The Lord your God, who goes before you, will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes, and in the wilderness, where you have seen how the Lord your God carried you, as a man carries his son, all the way that you went until you came to this place. Yet, in spite of this word, you did not believe the Lord your God, who went before you in the way to seek you out a place to pitch your tents, in fire by night and in the cloud by day, to show you by what way you should go. Moses said a lot here, but basically we see that they would not go up. Instead, they rebelled against God, against his command. Why did they rebel? Well, let's look once again at their reasoning, right? Yes, the land was good. They could all agree on that. It's great land, very fruitful, very fertile. However, the rest of the report from the spies was all bad news, right? It says here that the spies reported that the people of the land are greater and taller, that the cities are great and fortified. And there's a mention of Anakim, which is the sons of Anakim, which alludes to, like giants. So again, not only are the general people greater and taller, but they also have even greater and even taller people, giants. And because the spies spoke of how difficult and how challenging it looked, the hearts of the people melted in fear. And they came to a conclusion. It must be that the Lord actually hates us. That's why he brought us out of Egypt. He didn't rescue us. He brought us out to die at the hands of the Amorites. Would you consider their conclusion to be correct? I think it doesn't really make that much sense when you think about it. Why would God use such a roundabout way to destroy him? They've already seen what God can do. And for what purpose? It really doesn't make any sense. But we know that, when things are tough, when things are challenging, sometimes people just don't really think about things logically. Right? They came to this conclusion through fear, through lack of faith, and the inability to look at the bigger picture. As ridiculous as their conclusion may sound, I do think it is something we tend to do when we are blinded by our distrust. Earlier last year, my grandma had gone into the hospital after falling and breaking her hip. And the surgery for the partial hip replacement, was a success. But we decided it would be better for her to stay in the rehab center so that she could, just heal properly. It would be really hard for her to get around after such a surgery at such a, advanced age. Now that was one excruciating month that when she was in the rehab center. We would try to visit her often to keep her spirits up, but she really could not stand being there. And it didn't help that she might have been somewhat senile.
Here. You got enough.
Whenever we visited her, she'd be complaining about how they had her legs tied up for no reason and wouldn't let her walk around. So she thought, oh, they're just tying up my legs. Why won't they let me move? But even though it's because, she just had surgery, she's not supposed to move her legs too much. Gotta let it heal. And then throughout that time, she just had suspicions about everyone, including us, her family, right? She accused us of making her stay there because we hated her. No matter how many times we explained it's for her, to get better. It's time, we're trying to help you heal. But she just kept throwing all these accusations back at us. When we distrust someone, it doesn't matter what they do, right? Even if they have all good intentions, even if we make all sorts of leaps in logic to create baseless accusations, to kind of twist the narrative in our heads to make it fit. And that seems to be what is happening here, right? Did the Israelites actually have any real reason to assume that God hated them? No. If anything, all of their past experiences were supposed to help them see that God was on their side. Moses reminds them in the passage that we just read of what God has done for them, and he has done so much. God literally rescued them out of Egypt. God saved them from a life of permanent slavery and oppression. God carried them through the wilderness, providing for their needs, protecting them from the nations that were around, leading their path by visible and supernatural fire and cloud. And none of that mattered to them. Some people today, you still get that. People may sneer and say, hey, God isn't real. What are you guys doing praying? God doesn't exist. And, we see here that, and they may explain that, God doesn't, if God was real, he would reveal himself, right? And he doesn't reveal himself to us as he did to these Israelites. Yet even if God were to do some amazing thing, right in front of them, it seems likely that they would still not believe. And we see an example of this right here. The story of Israel from Exodus to Deuteronomy is nothing short of miraculous, right? Listen to the words of Moses in Deuteronomy 4, 32 to 35, as he describes just how amazing their journey has been. It reads, "For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that God created man on the earth, and ask from one end of the heaven to the other, whether such a great thing as this has ever happened or was ever heard of. Did any people ever hear the voice of a God speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and still live? Or has any God ever attempted to go and take a nation for himself from the midst of another nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, and by great deeds of terror, all of which the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes? To you it was shown that you might know that the Lord is God. There is no other besides him." Moses makes a great point here. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Now it's kind of an interesting point that Moses makes here when we especially consider, their situation, their time period at the point where, he was speaking to Israel. Now, I'm no expert on ancient times, but I assume news would be pretty hard to get around back then, right? And people back then, they wouldn't have, all the wonderful resources that we have, the internet, to find out about what's going on in other parts of the world, to understand all of history in the past, right? Today, you can hear about wars and politics all over the world. If things are kind of suspicious going on in China or Hong Kong or Taiwan, who knows what's going on, right? But you do get to hear something, at least, from some of these news sources. But for for these Israelites, they didn't have such a thing, right? So all they really, and plus, I mean, they pretty much spent their whole life as a slave in Egypt. So, so Moses makes this point, have you ever heard of such a thing? And we would think, oh, I mean, these Israelites, they probably didn't hear that much in general, but yet miraculously and amazingly, right, to this point still stands, even thousands of years later, even after nations and empires have come and gone. And even after we now have access to various historical records, we have archaeology, knowledge of these various ancient civilizations and religions. What other nation or what other tribe has ever made such a claim? Perhaps a few prophets may claim that some God speaks to them when nobody's watching. Or perhaps a small cult could say the same. But what nation as a whole has ever made a claim that they have all heard the voice of God as an assembly? What other oppressed or enslaved group of people has ever made a claim of being rescued by a God rather than some military might or war hero? And think upon how Israel managed to take the promised land. Throughout history, sure, there are numerous stories of invaders from other nations or that would come to conquer empires. Certainly would be commonplace trying to conquer weaker kingdoms with military might. Then you see things like warring tribes would tear apart empires through brutal tactics. But how many of those stories involve a nation of slaves just coming in, claiming a piece of land? It would be as though an army of refugees suddenly just became a force to be reckoned with. That doesn't happen, does it? Yet this is the claim. Ecclesiastes 1:9 states, "What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." That may be true for many, many things in this world, but the story of Israel is not one of them. They were guided by God. They heard the voice of God. And when the time came for them to obey God, what did they do? They rebelled. It didn't matter how many signs or wonders they saw. It didn't matter all that God had done in their lives before their eyes. They did not believe. Some people may say, oh, if God is real, then he should just reveal himself to me. Then I will believe in him. Oh, but that's not the right belief, is it? That's not the right faith. That's not what we mean when we speak of trust. Believing that God exists is really only the first step. But that is a meaningless step unless we actually put our trust in him through obedience. God didn't create a game of hide and seek where the only goal is to just find God and then we win, right? That's just the beginning. And for these Israelites, they even got to skip that whole part, right? God just showed himself directly to them. The Israelites who escaped from Egypt experienced God firsthand. They saw God, heard God. They knew he was real. But did that mean anything? Did that save them? Did that bring their hearts to obedience? No. They continually doubted him. And when it was finally time for them to receive their great reward, their wonderful destined inheritance, all they had to do was simply obey one more command. And they failed. The world is in a very strange time right now. Every command of God is being openly challenged by the world. Many things that seemed like common sense are being flipped upside down. You may be facing troubles already, or maybe there are troubles coming your way. But what will your response be in the midst of these troubles? When I was little, I thought that faith should be easy. You just got to believe, right? You just got to trust in God. Should be easy. But that was, when life was still sunshine and rainbows, a time when I was still hopelessly naive. But the longer you live, the older you get, the more you realize that faith in God is really, really hard. Failures, disappointments, regrets, even loss. It all takes its toll. But we have to keep the faith. We have to keep trusting in God. We have to continue to stay in the Word, in the Bible. We have to continue to gather as a church, because once our faith is weak, it doesn't matter what we've seen or what we've been through with God in the past. The experience itself isn't enough. What matters is whether or not we've learned through it or grown in it. If we squander what God has done in our lives, it will really be like it was all for nothing. It will be like these Israelites who constantly grumbled at God's goodness, never learning, never becoming grateful. And when God demands obedience at the turning point, when it seems impossible to obey, what will happen? What will be our response? We can either run away, like the Israelites did, thinking that God hates us. God's throwing us in these terrible situations just to spite us, and end up missing out on his great plan for us. Or we can push ahead, trusting that God does indeed love us, and end up finding the goodness that awaits those who seek after the living God. Let us close in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, once again, I thank you, as always, for your scripture. It is truly a blessing that we have, Lord, to have something that we can read and study and continually learn from. It's the unchanging word that has been with your children for all these centuries. And it continues to give us hope, no matter how crazy the world gets. I know, Lord, that the world as a whole, even though we have not experienced personally, has gone through many, many crazy things. There's been bigger, deadlier plagues in the past. There have been massive wars in the past that we have never, most of us have never been through, never experienced. And we know, oh Lord, that this is just the beginning. There's always more. There's always more trouble on the way. There's always more challenges that we must face. Sometimes things may seem impossible, but I pray, oh Lord, that you would give us the strength, the faith, the trust in you specifically to be obedient to your word, to your commands, Lord. And I just pray all this in the name of Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.